I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga, adjacent to Haudenosaunee territory and the territory covered by the Williams Treaty. This place was an important portage site and a spot of gathering. And this morning, when I arrived in the thick mist, I was greeted by a heron, a family of ducks, and a puppy eager to make friends with all of us. We are very thankful to be here. I always forget to introduce myself because it always feels like a family here. But I ought to, and it's come to my attention that sometimes I very much should. So I'm Finn Leach. I'm the curator here. For those of you who don't know, I've been here for about 3 years. And welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming. We know that fall is a very busy time in Peterborough, and it seems particularly busy this year. And today, which I didn't even know when I was writing this, but we've got Solidarity Weekend and 2 new important and potentially annual events added, Nogojimanog Day and the Insights Performance Series. We're thrilled to be a part of this new series with partner organizations Public Energy, and Bill Kimball, who basically is Public Energy, is here. Has been. This is true. You're passing a torch. Yeah. Art Space and the Reframe Film Festival. The goal of Insights is to open dialogues around the relationship between performance, site, and contemporary art practices. And if you haven't yet picked up a guide, please do so before leaving. We have copies upstairs. Events continue through the end of October, so there's lots to get out and do. And if you're feeling up to it later today, Solidarity Weekend continues in Confederation Square until 3 p.m. with a chill out. Today's panel is called Call and Response, Site-Specific Practice. The artists on today's panel all work in a way that I think requires heightened presence. I want to think about site specificity in terms of understanding the context in which we are working or presenting and making that of vital importance to the art. I have asked the panelists to consider if there is any additional potency within site-specific practice to destabilizing assumption. I'll begin by introducing the panelists. Then each one will present a short talk on their work. And as we are here within Brenda Francis Pelkey's retrospective exhibition, for her portion, we are going to walk through the art with her. Following that, there will be an opportunity for questions, and then there will be coffee and tea and nibbles upstairs. Born in Peterborough, Ontario, Becky Welter-Nolan has been working in Halifax, Nova Scotia for over a decade and is currently based in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Welter-Nolan's work has been exhibited within artist-run centers such as the Center for Art Tapes and White Rabbit open air projects, and recently exhibited a solo project at Dalhousie Art Center with Eye Level Gallery. As a member of the Hermes Art Collective, Welter-Nolan has participated in solo and group projects since 2014. With a parallel career as an arts administrator, Welter-Nolan is an advocate for artist-run centers and collaborative projects in Atlantic Canada, and is perhaps best known as the director or co-director of Herding Cats, which I really encourage you to check out online. It is a light-hearted documentary exploring the curatorial practice of Peter Dicos. Documentation of performances entitled Pushing It, 2 of which occurred in our gallery last week, is installed in the middle ramps. Vanessa Dion Fletcher employs porcupine quills, wampum belts, and menstrual blood to reveal the complexities of what defines a body, physically and culturally. She links these ideas to personal experiences with language, fluency, and understanding. All of these themes are brought together in the context of her Potawatomi and Lenape ancestry and her learning disability caused by a lack of short-term memory. Her work is held in the Indigenous Art Center collection in Gatineau, Quebec. In 2016, Dion Fletcher graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago with an MFA in performance. She is the recipient of the Canada Council for the Arts International Residency in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Last Saturday, Vanessa, along with Pearl Marie Salas, did a performance in the lower level of Peterborough Square with art space entitled Woven Wires. And last Sunday, Vanessa led Manifesto, a workshop, and I hope some of you were there. I was out of town and really bummed. Brian Solomon, sitting next to me, is of Anishinaabe and Irish descent, born and raised in the Northern Ontario community. Shibahoneng Killarney. He still calls this community home, along with Toronto, among other places. As a creator, Solomon is interested in engaging with unusual spaces and communities and nature. He is inspired by collaborating with individuals of all walks of life, who are trained artists or not, and guiding them to interact with their own life story. Solomon is passionate about helping people relearn about their forgotten bodies and taking back those spaces those bodies occupy. Nogojiwanag Rite of Spring will conclude the Insights performance series on October 19th and 20th, and is a re-envisioning of the 1913 early modern ballet Rite of Spring through a contemporary Indigenous lens. It is a site-specific dance performance performed by community members and professional dance artists taught via an open rehearsal workshop process over the duration of Brian Solomon's 6-week residency with Public Energy. It will take place in a downtown Peterborough parking lot that is an Anishinaabe burial site. Brenda Francis Pelkey, whose hometown is Peterborough?
That's really hard to say.
Really hard to say. Fair enough, but has lived in Peterborough.
And my family.
And family still continues to have ties here. Began making art in North Bay, Ontario, followed by a time in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in the East Coast, and more recently in Windsor, Ontario, where she also served as director of the School of Visual Arts at the University of Windsor. Today, she continues an active role as a professor and artist. Being the daughter and father of a military career meant that it's difficult to consider where a hometown is. And her family moved many times during her youth. Equally, the evolution of her professional life has required successive relocations. The works in this exhibition are informed by these biographical experiences as well as by ideas of social geography and psychology. For Francis Pelkey, social geography and psychology are the experiences of public and private spaces which are not mapped in the traditional sense, but rather have the power to create personal meaning. Her works invite viewers to imagine outcomes of events past, present, and future, which may have happened, may be happening, and could happen in those spaces, and from feminist viewpoints. As previously mentioned, the exhibit within which we are gathered is a retrospective of her work curated by Catherine Masden, director of the Art Gallery of Windsor, and this is indeed toured by the Art Gallery of Windsor. A catalog accompanying the show is forthcoming and will be well worth the wait. We begin with Becky Belter-Nolan.
Hello. Thanks for having me on this wonderful panel of fantastic people. I'm really excited to learn more about everyone's work today. So I'm just going to go through a few older projects that I had shown Finn when we were working on the performance project that's in the ramp space. So I'm just going to start with where I began with site-specific and performative works. This is a project called Directions that I did with my partner Daniel Hyam and my dog, whose name is Cash. And the premise of the project was that we were asking people on our residency at White Rabbit Open Air Arts Project. It's a week-long residency in Pictou County, Nova Scotia, about site-specific work, which culminates in a festival. So we were asking people who lived in the area and other artists for directions to places that they think that we should go. And we were just using oral directions to find the sites that they were giving us, and on occasion a hand-drawn map if we felt like it was warranted. And then we were mapping the locations that we were trying to get to using flagging tape, which is used by my partner in search and rescue training. And then the whole process was documented by our dog, who is our shadow documenter. And it was kind of an exploration of trying to figure out how to document a performative work without an audience. So this was a kind of a trial event, and this work kind of expanded into an installation process at Hermes Art Gallery, in which I was trying to use the flagging tape in a more sculptural space, where we had the documentation of the video, which you can find online, from my dog, and also trying to create a space within the gallery institution that gives people a sense of comfort, and trying to figure out a way for bodies to inhabit spaces, gallery spaces specifically, which can be cold, and not somewhere where you want to spend much time, and trying to make that more comfortable. So my work is often kind of riding that boundary between comfort and discomfort, and trying to make spaces slightly more comfortable. But those orange sculptures that you can see there are actually made of rubbery plastic and are quite scratchy, despite their being really tempting. That project had a number of continuations. This iteration was called Site Search, a project with Eye Level Gallery in Halifax at the Citadel Hill in Halifax. The overarching performance series was called Over the Hill, and it was celebrating Eye Level's 40th anniversary. And I worked with William Robinson, did a project, and Kyle Aldlin Martins also worked there to engage the Citadel Hill as a historic site and as a contemporary site. What I was trying to do here was ask tourists that were visiting the site for places which I should visit, trying to get fresh eyes from their perspective as to how to navigate this space. And this is a really challenging space to do the project in because there are not a lot of vertical structures in which to tie flagging tape to. But also just it became, I really think I gave the tourists a lot more credit in my proposal, because often, you know, they were not giving me answers, or they would just tell me to go back into the barracks, which is kind of one of the more interesting spaces. But it's a really heavy space to work in. It's a really sanitized military site, and it was built in part by the Maroons, who are from Jamaica, and some of the first kind of settlers of Black descent in the area were really instrumental in actually building the Citadel site, which is a very complicated history of colonialism, and it's a really heavy space to work in. I found this project really challenging, so I think when you're thinking about site-specific work, it's sometimes you don't you overestimate the simplicity of a context, and then as you work in the space, it becomes more and more apparent the levels of complexity that exist within that space. That's really what I learned from this project. And these are the washers that I was using to designate the paths that I was taking in the Citadel. And then this was my first kind of foray into directed performance. My friend Sophia Bartholomew, who's a former director of Connection Artist Run Center in New Brunswick, did this project called Resolute Parka, which I feel like was maybe just a way for her to get a new winter coat. But her project was using this parka as an artist-run center. And so a number of artists were invited to create work for the parka, or in the parka, or on the parka, and using those kind of plastic sheaths often. My project with her was creating these directional charms, of which I gave one to Finn, and It's fine. There are these crocheted arrows, essentially, and the instructions for her were to use the directional charm to like toss it and then continue to follow the directions of the charm until she felt uncomfortable, until she found herself in a space in which she felt uncomfortable, and then to do the reverse. So following the charm back into a space where she felt more comfortable. And then that ended up in a publication mostly, and it was a really fun project. Getting to do a performative piece that I didn't have to perform was really nice. This is a recent project from about a year ago, which is this installation is called We Need Space. It was a residency that I did at the Dalhousie University Art Gallery, which was investigating eye-level galleries' archives. They've had a 40-year archive as an artist-run center, and my proposal was that they had already had 3 residencies investigating their archives in the last 10 years. So it was about institutional memory. And so I was surprised that they picked it, to be honest. But this project was creating a space for the gallery staff to sleep in, which they really appreciated because they had a tough install week. And then there was an audio component, which I'm not sure.
General Members Meeting,
Yeah.
Eye-Level Gallery, October 16th, 1975. Board Member Meeting, Eye-Level Gallery, a description of
So the audio is me reading all of their board minutes about having to move. So they moved a lot. And that was really the main repetition in the gallery's history was being displaced. So I did this eye-level moving marathon where we did a 5K run to each location that Eye Level had lived in over its 40-year history. I think it ended up being about 13 or 15 different locations. And the funniest part was that they had been in the same address, they had been in the same address twice on 2 separate occasions, where they had moved back to somewhere they didn't realize they had been before. Yeah. So it was in sequence is the thing. So we were running up and down Halifax most of the day. And we had these kind of pennies with the maps on them. So that was kind of the precursor. I've been more interested in the physical aspect of performance art. And so with Rocky 3 and pushing it, this was kind of an investigation of effort, mostly. So the basis of it is a 200-pound soft sculpture that I pushed up George Street in Halifax and up the ramp space here at the Art Gallery of Peterborough. I'm still figuring out the layers of meaning here, but I think it definitely has a kind of an interest. I have an interest in this idea that you can just achieve whatever you want based on effort, and I'm trying to challenge that notion that there are contextual limitations within each space and within each time period that provide barriers, which can sometimes make things more interesting, but also make things a lot more challenging. So I was pushing this up George Street in Halifax, which has the major houses of power in the city. So there's the law courts, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, our provincial legislature, the city hall, the Halifax Trade Center, and our provincial Arts Funder, Arts Nova Scotia are all on the same street, and it heads right up to the clock tower on Citadel Hill, which I had actually never realized that all of the houses of power are located on the same street in Halifax until I was trying to find a location for this project. And it's also one of the steepest hills in Halifax, so that was convenient for me. Just thinking about, I was trying to think about what makes site-specific work interesting to me with this panel, and I don't know if anyone here knows the performance artist Hennessy Youngman, but he has a fantastic video explaining post-structuralism, where he explains that post-structuralism be like you can't step outside of history, which is, I think, probably the most interesting part of having kind of site-specific work, is that you have to work within the context that you are in. So it's always kind of necessarily contemporary. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave it there and pass it on.
And Brian Solomon's going to go second. Do you have slides or no slides?
Thanks. Ani Bojo Brian Indigenous de Bononing Dunjaba. My name's Brian Solomon. I am Ojibwe and Irish, which could make me Ojiberish. I'm from Jibononing, which means safe canoe passage. It can be interpreted a few different ways. And we as well as Nogo Jiwonong have a very, very long history of routes, canoe routes, water routes, travel, as do most Turtle Island North American communities. They're kind of right smack dab on the spot where there was already a community. How about that? Yeah, I grew up in this community. Am I back on? There we go. I grew up in this community, which is very small. There's kind of just about 150 year-round residents. And in my father's time, sort of before 1962, there was no road that connected the community to Greater Ontario at that time. So going back just sort of 40, 50 years is kind of like going back 100, 200 years. So I was born in the 80s, just a couple decades after this road went in, so I was privy to a lot of the old ways, which I feel immensely grateful for. Yeah, so building stuff in my childhood was just a way of life, and self-sufficiency was something that sort of paralleled poverty and helped relieve it in some ways. So the art bone was so deep, but at that time, all I could really do was work with the physical things around me. So I started as a visual artist. There's also a huge history of visual art in the area. You could be familiar with the Killarney Provincial Park, founded by the Group of Seven, which actually, and I really hope this is recorded, spearheaded colonization in the area. It's really important to know this, that the Group of Seven, they might have joined forces altogether, but in some ways they served as a voice of a more modern colonization. You see, there's never people in their work. You're just sort of taking this incredible landscape completely out of context. With the Killarney Provincial Park came the expansion of this road. This road brought tourists, and it brought garbage, actually. So I began as a visual artist, transitioned into theater, and then found dance and was like, wow, this is the thing. This is completely animated visual art and line, and had this career in my 20s as a professional dancer here and in Europe. And I continue to engage as a professional dancer. And sort of at end of the 20s, began re-engaging with visual art and installation work specifically, and found dance and just a physical body in the thing a really important way to animate something that's otherwise stationary. So going back to the influence of the provincial park, a year and a half ago, at the Art Gallery of Ontario, I was invited to do an activation alongside their Lauren Harris exhibit, and I was like, man, I hate Harris. Like, why do these people keep getting space? I mean, we have audience, we've got these incredible spaces. Why do these guys keep getting space? And it inspired a great work, which will have a great history, or a great future. I'm really proud of it. A piece I called Dump Bears, where I took a room similar to this size, filled with a bunch of boring classical works in the main floor of the AGO, one of those donor rooms. Specifically, I really wanted one of the donor rooms, and created, if you're familiar with Harris's work, it's sort of these rolling mountain icebergy things. So I made some garbage mounds that sort of resembled similar angles. And a collaborator of mine who will be here in The Rite of Spring, Mariana Medellin of Mexican indigenous descent, she played a black bear, this beautiful 50s bikini in this black fur around her neck and black aviators and a black nose, and sort of suntanned in the garbage, alongside the garbage, in this sort of Muskoka-esque fashion. And I painted her on plein air, but I was actually painting a real black bear. And we did this as a durational thing, drinking Chardonnay, kicking people out of the space that annoyed us. This is kind of the feeling in the area now. It's hard to imagine it, but provincial parks, cottagers, and cottage culture wreak havoc on a lot of areas. Specifically with that exact image that I'm giving with the group of 7, or just imagining that the cottager that you see on Facebook, Instagram, in a Cottage Life magazine, you're giving this land without any context. And where I'm from specifically, it brought a road, it brought garbage, and this incredible creature, the makwa, this medicine creature, now eats this garbage. So we would never eat anything from the makwa again. And we learned a great deal of things from this guy. You know, he can eat so well, he can sleep through the whole winter, so he's found a lot of roots, a lot of medicines that you might now consume in greater Western culture. So my work in terms of space and site, it's really, as I go on, that they're really not separable things. So approaching the residency here with Public Energy, as you mentioned, I'm doing Ngozi Wanong Rite of Spring, partnered with Public Energy in the Cheney Wenjack School for Indigenous Studies. We're talking with Bill about doing this thing, and he was really keen on the idea of it being outside. And we're looking at sites, and somebody had mentioned the Brock Street parking lot, and I've been to Peterborough for years and had no idea that this thing existed. And when I've spoken subsequently to anybody in the community who's not involved in the arts or isn't Indigenous, they've got no idea that this situation is there, and it really feels like a situation when you're hanging out there. So I'm really interested in that way as well, about getting art, performance, visual. As I go on, I just sort of see it all as one thing. In my own attempt to become a whole human being, Nishnabek, man, I want art to kind of be whole for myself as well. So I am trying to get out of those silos of a dance work and a visual work. It's helpful for me to incorporate people who are outside of these audiences, outside of this audience of this room, even. And that continues to be a challenge for me because art, it can feel very unwelcoming. The spaces that it goes on in, only certain people sort of feel welcome in. If you're not cultured with the modern culture of art, that as well is a barrier between you accessing it. It's got this sort of colonial hangover where it still feels like it's for an audience that is likely not for you. And I certainly felt that way growing up as a child, that there's this greater thing that I'll just never be able to touch. So I've got a real hunger for marrying the worlds of art and those that would never feel welcome to touching the thing. And I'm sure everybody here in the room does too. And it's a thing for us to continue to try and evolve. So with this project, we've been inviting, some participants are here, we've been inviting just any participant who's interested in the city to come. And we're working on indigenizing the body. Decolonizing is a word I would have used a few years ago when writing my thesis on this process, but that is a term that's since been sort of co-opted by many communities and sort of doesn't really mean anything now. And marrying it with people who do spend maybe their whole lifetime working as movement specialists, as professional dancers, and we're jointly creating this work in this space as an offering to the situation there, to the spirits there that likely want to be danced for. And I mean with hopes that maybe more activations will happen there in the space. Christy Belcourt has done, or rather Rebecca Belmore has done a work there, and maybe more people will continue to, and maybe eventually it won't be a parking lot anymore. The way that we work with finding dance is as well attempting to not use any sort of elite type of terminology that's French and balletic in nature, and trying to achieve embodiment and understanding of movement with this process of asking yourself how your bodies come to be colonized. And even just as we sit here, I'll finish with this. One way, I'm missing a left hand, so I think about my hands a lot, is if you take your hands up over your head, and I'd invite any of you right now to do this, and sort of rotate them. Think of this baby finger and rotate it backwards like you're lifting something. Wow, and if you do that for like 20, 30 seconds, just let your hands have this little exploration. It's like you've been at the gym for a half hour. And you think, wow, why is that so powerful? And why does my hand instantly want to do this? You know, your arms are like, yeah, wow, thank you. I've got permission to use all these muscles. They want to be used. It's because we're encouraged to have our hands down in society. You know, you only raise them when you're trying to draw attention. We don't want to draw too much attention, cause a panic, you know, and by simply raising your arms out in space, you take over the space, you command the space, and you begin to challenge how you've come to be socialized, normalized. So that's a bit of the way we work, and you can come check it out, but I'll end there. Miigwech.
Thank you. Yeah, that felt really good. Vanessa Dion Fletcher.
Kunganau Loma, Nitishin Zivanasa, Niha Lenape Potoatame Okwau, Nunjayi Nahi, Toronto Wakiki, Anishik. So my name is Vanessa Dion Fletcher, and the first word I said is one of the first words I learned in the Lenape language, and it means I'm glad to see you all. And I'm very glad to see everyone and to be here and to have been invited to this place and the Anishinaabe territory to share a bit of my work. So I first came to Peterborough. I was invited by William Kingfisher to present a project called Writing Landscape. And that was one of the first works I made after I'd finished school. And I think it really kind of set a lot of the I guess maybe tone for the way I would continue working and engaging with site until you know, kind of into the future. So in that project, I had I took copper intaglio printing plates. So they're thin pieces of copper, and I tied them to my feet, and I went on these walks. And I walked around Toronto, and I walked around my grandmother's reserve in southwestern Ontario, and then I went on and I walked up north to an Inuit community that I was visiting. And each of these places had kind of important different meanings for me, but the action was a way of creating a relationship with the place and recording that relationship. So it was about taking time and being in my body in a really different way, because I had these kind of awkward shoes on. And as you probably know, copper is a really great conductor of heat. So when I was walking on the land, I could feel all the different temperatures. So sometimes my feet would get really cold and there'd be all these cold patches, but if I moved around, I could find these patches of warmth, and if I just stood there for a minute, it would warm up. And then, so as I walked, the movement would bend. The copper's really soft, and it would bend and mold to my feet, and then it would get scratched by the rocks and the earth beneath it. So it wasn't really a recording of my foot, and it wasn't a recording of the land. It was about the movement between the two, and my presence and movement between my body and the landscape. And I think it was important to think about where I was living in Toronto as a person of Indigenous and European ancestry. And but the Potawatomi and Lenape, Toronto isn't their traditional territory, so I wanted to think about my relationship to the city and the land, and take a moment to acknowledge that. And then at my grandmother's reserve, I had never been there before. My grandmother left when she was 9 because her father joined the army, and at that time, if you joined the army, you became enfranchised. So you were no longer an Indian as defined by the Indian Act. You were a Canadian citizen, and so no longer allowed to live on the reserve. And that really kind of facilitated the beginning of the family's kind of distance from the community. But I created a way to get back there and to start to make a relationship with the place. And again, taking the time through the movement with the copper was part of that. And in the Inuit community I'd visited, I was truly amazed to be in a place where little kids and people my own age and the elders in the community all spoke Inuktitut. They all spoke their language. Because I was thinking about how to communicate kind of both with myself and with other people and with the land, and how to make this communication happen without using the only words I have, which are English words. I wanted to kind of maybe celebrate and experience and recognize this community that is still speaking their language. And then I was invited to come back this year, and I was still thinking about different ways of communicating and different relationships to place, but a little bit differently this time. I'm gonna play you some sound. I had, yeah. Okay, so I'll show you a picture, and then I'll play you some sound. There we go. Okay, this is sideways, but we can fix that. Yeah.
Sometimes the mouse is a little.
Yeah, give me. There we go. Okay. So I'll play some sound, but so this would be the video that you'd be seeing on the projection, and then this is a very complicated technological setup that I'll explain, but I'll let you listen a little bit first. So, you're hearing the voices of two Navajo people, and they're talking about their understanding of themselves and kind of, I guess you could say, a gender identity within Navajo culture. It's just a little clip. The video goes on to explain more. But what's happening is the video's being played on a laptop, and then it's being transmitted via an analog signal to a TV, and then a video camera is being pointed at the screen of the TV, and that's going to the projector. And there's a couple of different pieces that manipulate the sound. And this is my collaborators section. And so it's creating a circular loop. And because we're I'll tell you my part in a second, but because it's working with an analog signal, that it's influenced by the specific, by the room. And you can see remember in the picture I showed you, there's a lot of static on the screen. So that's one of the ways that the image is manipulated, is through kind of the clarity of how much of the picture you can see and how much static there is. And Pearl kind of controls that and doesn't control it. But the static is picking up. The static comes from the electric energy that's in the room, and that's both from other computers, other electronic devices, what's happening, and then a small percentage of it is also picking up I'm trying to find the word, cosmic background radiation, which is the heat that's left over from the creation of the universe. So it's about, people are, telling their stories and talking about how they understand themselves within a community and how other people understand them, and also the misunderstandings and the miscommunications. And that whole story is being kind of played in this electronic loop and being influenced by the different electric energy. And Pearl and I talk about the way that electronics are are such a big part of our lives now. I'm speaking to you through it. And the way that electric energy can also be understood as kind of can be related to the idea of the fire, and talking about the fire as a gathering place where we tell our stories and communicate to each other and to the spirits, and then we're talking about using this kind of now our technology as the same kind of electric energy, and how can we communicate with each other and with the spirits, and welcome in the buzzing and the static energy, and the miscommunications. And then in the second part, I take over. So in that clip, what you're hearing is the feedback that's created from hearing aids. So what's happening is the sound waves are coming in through this part of the hearing aid that would be kind of in the ear, and it's coming out and it's circling around. The same thing's happening with this one. So the whistling you hear is the feedback that's made through the hearing aids, and then it's being projected through a sound system. I thought about I knew about this phenomenon from hugging my grandmother, and some of you might be familiar with that. If you hug someone who uses hearing aids, you might hear the whistling sound because your head gets close to their ear, and then you create a feedback loop. So these are my grandmother's hearing aids. She passed away a few years ago, and I held on to them. And every once in a while, I use them as a portal to my past as well as my future. Because hearing loss runs in my family. So I've also I've worn her hearing aids and I've worn my mother's hearing aids. And the first time I did that, I realized that, it's electronic world is filtered through your ears and there's an echo. So everything you hear sounds like this. It sounds like you're hearing every little breath and every little, every sound through an electronic system. So I heard my future that day. I heard what my future will sound like when I start to lose my hearing. And then it's a way to reflect on and kind of metaphorically communicate with my past. And the narrative I talk about is things that my grandmother taught me and kind of family stories and little moments.
Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to get the opportunity to stand, which is going to feel nice, I think. We're going to walk around the space with Brenda, and if you need to, you can absolutely bring a chair along with you. If you need a hand, just let somebody know. I'm sure we're all happy to help.
Well, I'll start. We're talking about the importance, or maybe it's not important to consider place. In this body of work, which was done in the 1980s, place I thought was quite important. And with photography, it's interesting because you think that place is always important, but specific places aren't always important. This was absolutely, undeniably, I wanted to photograph in a foundry. I was fascinated by the fact that foundries still existed in an age where it was just sort of, beginning the information age, technology, etc., and people were still engaged in this kind of labor. And I felt also it was important to document the labor and the individuals as well. Brian talked about art galleries not being necessarily welcoming to all peoples. When I had the opening at the Photographers Gallery in Saskatoon, all of the foundry workers were invited and came, and it was the normal audience in the art gallery that felt unwelcome that night. In fact, a lot of people told me that they had been actually feeling really intimidated because these men were very large and different from them. So it was really interesting. In the next body of work, which is down here, it's interesting because Finn had me thinking about, okay, when has it been important for me to photograph something specific, and when has a stand-in been possible because I'm speaking about something else? So this work I kind of consider to be my kiss goodbye to documentary photography, that I was actually more interested in trying to engage in the practice a little bit differently. So I was working on these two bodies of work simultaneously. So with the great effect of the imagination on the world, which is the backyard series down here, I was really, really interested in the way in which our imaginations manifest, that interior world that we carry around with us all of the time shows that it can escape the inside and become manifest outside. And the great effect of the imagination on the world is a quote from Jeanette Winterson novel, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which is a terrific read. I love her work. Anyway, we'll go down here. Now, one of the things that I did in photographing the backyards was I decided to photograph at night and use movie lights. And luckily, my husband was involved in the film industry, and I had access to a whole pile of movie lights. So we went hunting for these very specific places, at times standing on the roof of my car, peering into people's yards, whenever I thought that I saw something that looked remotely interesting. Some places were not possible, because there's more than you think, but not possible because the people that had created some of these amazing things were not quite right in the head and couldn't, I mean, it had to be a fair exchange. I mean, I couldn't just go and photograph without the people who made the work, but also they had to understand why I was doing it and everything. And in some cases, that didn't seem possible, and so I didn't photograph those places. So that's the last work that, for quite a while, that is very specific, I would guess. So we'll just turn off the mic for a minute and carry on down. Oh. All of these places, too, are in Saskatoon. Most of them right within the neighborhood that I lived in. For instance, this one here with the backyard, it's called Maxime Coleman's Quiet Refuge. That was about a block and a half from where I lived, and their front yard also was highly decorated. This work I did in the 1980s, and then it toured for 6 years, I think. And it was like the work that just wouldn't die. It was like, please, can we get past this? And I'm, like you're doing more things. You're working with different ideas, and so it continued to be exhibited right up in the early 2000s. Yeah, so it's been all over the world. Well, not all over, but quite a few places. So we'll go into the gallery here next. Can I start? Yeah. Okay. So this next stuff is stand-in. I mean, these are not the actual places or anything to do with the actual sites. Both this one and this one is the next body of work called Dreams of Life and Death. And so I really shifted in the practice from, I guess, the more literal kind of transcriptions of what is to more imagined spaces, broke the frame up, trying to get away from the tyranny of the camera because it's, so resolutely in that frame, it becomes almost kind of impossible to break away. So I started to, well, you saw in the backyard stuff, fragment the image, and then explored that further here. And then we get into this body of work, Memento Mori, I think, this is, and using text, again, to interrupt the image, but in a different way than I did here. This was very much informed by a lot of readings in Mircea Eliade, The Sacred and the Profane, where he talks about landmarks in memory, or psychological landmarks, and so I wanted to position these as though you were looking at an historical marker, but instead it's a memory of something, so it's much more internal. These, sometimes I think there's no excuse for what I've done, but it's stories told me by others that I then combined with images And again, in order to kind of explore both the photograph and how it could be used, I was never really satisfied with the fact that in a photograph, people tend to believe it to be quite transparent, that like kind of it is what it is and that's all there is. And I thought, no, there has to be something more. I don't know whether there is or not, but that's what I played around with. There's one image from another body of work called Oblivion, and sight in Oblivion, again, was not necessarily important at all. I was working with flipping imagery around, and that comes out most strongly in this ocean and forest, which is after the work, after the body of work Oblivion, and it was from a body of work called Haunts. Sight again wasn't necessarily important, although after having done this work here, which are stand-in images for the stories, I was talking with a curator who said, why don't you go back to some of the places where the stories actually took place? And it hadn't occurred to me that might be really interesting. So with the help of the Canada Council and the Saskatchewan Arts Board, I was able to go back to a community that I hadn't lived in for over 20 some years and photograph some places. But again, they're not actual places. They're just places where that I could use. So, and images, I mean, like when you're away photographing, and again, at night, movie lights, generator, in the woods, the ocean is photographed after the sun actually went down. So it was in the dark. And it's just an experiment. It was just like, let's see what will happen. And then worked with the images after. You can't really hear the sound component, but there's voices on that audio, voices from actually a very crowded room. It was actually a lineup on the way to the cafeteria at the University of Saskatchewan, but I wanted to modulate the voices to mimic the sound of waves crashing. So I worked on that, and the audio on this is what's missing again in the picture, which are the leaves on the tree. So it's the sound of trees, leaves rustling. So I was playing with the images like that. And then we get into another body of work called Spaces of Transformation, and I photographed bars, hospitals, and courtrooms as sites of potential sites. Made the images large so that you had the ability to kind of project into the image, not overly large so that it was kind of a space you could kind of walk into, but just big enough that you could imagine it as a site where something could take place. And I chose these three because I thought they really kind of symbolized the extremes of emotion. So joy, despair, the courtrooms, I mean, it could be a good outcome, could be a bad outcome. So I just wanted to play with what happens when you show all these together. Will they speak to one another? So I worked on that project for about 4 years in total. Showed the bars and the hospital rooms together, but I then later added the courtrooms, which had always been what I had wanted to do in the first place, but I had to get a whole pile of work ready for an exhibition, and the courtrooms weren't in that one. After that, which is the mid-2000s, I began to photograph more kind of transitional spaces. I'm interested in places that are almost neither here nor there. In other words, they're incomplete, they're not done, they're not finished. So it's another way to kind of play with the photograph. So I've been photographing on the back wall. They're industrial sites that are in transition. They're not complete. And also I've been photographing domestic spaces the same way when people are moving in or moving out of apartments or houses. So that's where I am. That's what I'm continuing to do. And that is 10 minutes.
Well done. Well done. I'm just going to turn that off. Thank you to all the panelists. That's so, thank you for really taking the time to think about your work in that very particular way. At this time, we welcome questions from the audience. If anybody has something that they'd like to ask in this forum, we're happy to. And if not, we can go upstairs. We can go upstairs and we can continue conversations up there on a more personal basis. And it's probably just around noon, so it's a nice time to have, look at that, afternoon. It's a nice time to have coffee or tea. We've got muffins and biscotti, I think. So, and while we're upstairs, some of our staff will be shifting this space around, so you'll be able to see Brenda's exhibition more as it's intended to be, and you'll be able to hear those sound components more clearly. Thank you all again for coming.